Hello, GSC SHRM. This is Jeff Harry with Rediscover Your Play. And today we are talking about dudes do better, dismantling toxic masculinity at work. For today's talk, as I start to share my screen here, what we really want to actually dive into is not just how dudes can do better, but what each of us can do to start dismantling the toxicity and so much of the toxic masculinity that's embedded in our work culture at all times. All right, so let's get into it. So I want you to take a moment to visualize that toxic person at your work. I want you to visualize what actually comes up. What are the words that come up when you think of this person? Are they a misogynist? Are they sexist? Are they just rude? Are they dismissive? Are they mean? Like, what are the words that actually are conjured up when you think of this toxic person? And as you're thinking of this toxic person, I want you to check in on how your body feels, how you actually feel right now. Are you feeling anxious? Are you feeling stressed? Are you feeling angry? Are you feeling frustrated? Are you just livid that this person even is still at your company? And part of the reason we're doing this is because this actually affects our psychology as well as our physical well-being. And this is just one way in which we need to check in on what impact they have, right? So just check in for a second, visualize that toxic person, how you feel, right? And then when you've gotten a good picture of them, go ahead and shake that off. Go ahead, shake that off. And then now I want you to visualize a coworker you admire, someone you appreciate, someone that you look forward to going to work to see, someone that you know has your back. And what are the feelings that come up for you when you think of this person that you appreciate, right? Supported, seen, heard, valued, appreciated, understood. All these different feelings actually come up when you think of this person. And again, part of the reason why we do this is I want to show the contrast between these feelings and how that actually directly affects our workplace and directly affects our productivity in the workplace. So what we're going to be actually covering today is we're going to reflect on how we got here, how in the world did we get here, how much is toxic masculine leadership costing us right now? Then we're going to explore what does effective leadership even look like going forward, because we're going to be talking specifically about toxic masculine leadership, right? So what does that actually look like if we are able to dismantle that? Then we're going to try to provide solutions for every level of the workforce as best as we can. And then finally, I don't want to talk about this stuff unless we're actually going to take some action. So we're going to identify actions that can be implemented immediately. And if you wanted to use a worksheet to walk through this, you can simply go to rediscoveryourplay.com/GSC SHRM, and there's a PDF there you can actually download and then walk through, as I'm going to be asking many questions as we figure out how do we dismantle toxic masculinity from the workplace. So let's start off with this. Who needs to change, right? Because for the longest time, the burden has been placed on women since they began in the workforce, or frankly began life itself. But at least just talking about the workforce, it's been really the burden's been placed on women. And really, the people that have to fix a lot of this are the men. It's us men that have to deal with this and address this, because we haven't touched this for a long time. And whether we're consciously or unconsciously supporting this patriarchal system, we have to own up to our contribution in this, right? We might not be toxic in ourselves or, outwardly ourselves, but we really have allowed it to run amok. So the other reason why I say this is because I also want to be careful for many of the women that are on here watching this. I do not want to mansplain. I do not want to tell you something that you already know. So if I do in advance, I'm apologizing in advance for that. But I do want to also communicate to you that there are allies. There are male allies that also recognize this is not beneficial for them either. They don't enjoy this. They don't enjoy the bully at the office. They don't enjoy the fact that they feel gaslit just as much as you do sometimes, right? So recognizing that we have to believe that there are male allies that actually exist at our organizations. And I challenge you to explore that as best as you can, because they are going to be able to help you actually start to dismantle this toxic masculinity and this patriarchy in the workplace. So right now, work sucks. If you talk to most employees, or you simply hop on TikTok and write hashtag work sucks, you'll see thousands, if not tens of thousands of videos of people communicating how much they hate work. And the reality is like, even if you dismantle toxic masculinity, parts of work just may still suck, but it doesn't have to be such a toxic place. And if we get to a place where we feel as if people have our back, we feel as if, we are being seen, heard, and appreciated, then maybe we could do better work, and maybe we'd have less people quitting. Maybe we would have more of a workplace where people felt as if they could speak up for one another or speak up themselves. And that's what we're trying to do here, is just simply reduce the amount of toxicity so work doesn't have to suck so much. So who am I? This is me pre-pandemic, and me post-pandemic. As you can see, it's been a hard pandemic. And as I mentioned earlier, my name is Jeff Harry with Rediscover Your Play. And when I was a kid, I watched the movie Big with Tom Hanks, right? So when I saw the movie Big with Tom Hanks, I was like, he can play with toys. He gets to play with toys for a living. He gets paid to do that job. I want to do that job. So I started writing toy companies in third grade, and I did not stop until I got into the toy industry 15 years later. And I don't know if you've ever gotten exactly what you've always wanted and then been so disappointed when you got it. There was no toys, no fun, no high fives, no kids, no joy. But you know what there was a lot of? A lot of toxicity, a lot of toxic masculinity, a lot of backstabbing, a lot of bullying. I was actually working for Toys R Us at the time, and you know how that ended. In their corporate office in New Jersey, Paramus, New Jersey, commuting from Brooklyn to Paramus, New Jersey every day. Oh my gosh. And it was just so disappointing, because this was supposed to be my dream industry. It was supposed to be my dream job. And instead, I had to leave this industry, and I left New York, left New Jersey, came to the San Francisco Bay Area, where I bumped into an organization that was teaching kids engineering through Lego. They basically were just playing for a living. And we took it from 7 people to 400 people. It became the largest Lego-inspired STEM organization in the US. We taught 100,000 kids a year, 1,000,000 kids within the span of 10 years. And we did it all by playing. No business plan. We picked cities we thought were fun. We picked people we thought were fun. We followed our intuition. We followed our curiosity. We focused on inspiring our staff rather than commanding them. And we tried as best as we could, even though it was tough, because they're, toxic guys are sneaky little devils, but we avoided hiring toxic people as best as we could. And that helped the organization. That was just like, well, why aren't other companies doing this? Like, this is easy, right? And then we eventually got the attention of Silicon Valley, Facebook, Google, Adobe, a bunch of those companies like that. And I started running team buildings events for all these tech companies over the next 10 years. And I realized They hadn't solved this problem, that there was still toxicity at their jobs, that there was still toxic masculinity embedded in so many of the organizations. And these were considered the best organizations in the world. So if they hadn't addressed this, then who hasn't addressed this? So I created Rediscover Your Place specifically to address difficult conversations and difficult issues like this, because we have to figure out how to do this together. So coming back to you, so what are the words that actually come up for you when you think of toxic masculinity? What words describe toxic masculinity to you, right? Is it misogyny? Is it sexism? Is it old boys club? Is it patriarchy? What are the words that actually come up for you when you think of toxic masculinity? Now, the word that I don't want to come up with, but it actually comes up all the time, is that idea that it's anti-men. That toxic masculinity equals anti-men, and it doesn't. What we're talking about is toxic masculine leadership, which can be exhibited by any person, whether you're Jeff Bezos or Elizabeth from Theranos, or whether you identify as male, female, uh, non-binary, however you identify, you can exhibit toxic masculine leadership traits. All of us actually do a little bit, because that is what has been told to us as actually being effective. There's been so much propaganda celebrating toxic masculine leaders, especially in the media, from Wolf of Wall Street to the WeWork guy to Elizabeth Theranos, from the Uber guy. If you think about it, so many narcissists are constantly making stories about how great they are and how effective they are, that you actually believe that Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg, and Elon Musk are the best leaders out there because they're toxic. And we have to remember that this is the propaganda that is being pushed, that they are constantly selling that this actually works when it does not. And that is what I'm going to make the case for today. So let's first define what I mean by toxic masculinity, right? Toxic masculinity is any narrow and repressive description of manhood designating being a man as defined by dominance and aggression and individualism and lack of emotion. And I want to emphasize the dominance, aggression, individualism, and the lack of emotion, because I'm going to point out where that actually is shown up in our workplace. Also, what are the toxic masculine leadership traits? Bullying, avoiding losing at all costs, restraining one's emotions, masking your insecurity with aggression. Look how strong I am, right? And I pick this photo also because it's also a little sexy. And it's just like, ooh, check this out. This is how you get things done. You got to be a little toxic in order to get things done, like the madman, like old boys club, right? That is being sold to us on a constant basis. But what I believe is that toxic masculine leadership drove the Great Resignation. That actually, in many ways, this is the reason why we have the Great Resignation. And what we have to explore is what actually has happened, right? In around April or May of 2020, right? You had workers from like Tyson and Tesla being forced back into factories before there was a vaccine, and people were literally getting sick on the line and dying. You had people from places like John Deere simply walking out of their organizations because they were being treated so badly. You even had so much gaslighting when it came to airlines like American Airlines that laid off 17,500 people in October. And then around May, we're like, wait a minute, we can't find any employees. Where did all the employees go? You fired and laid them off. What do you think? And then remember what they blamed cancellations on? Weather. People not wanting to work anymore. Oh my gosh, why does no one want to work anymore? Because you let them go and then you expected them just hang around, right? Then on top of that, in 2021, 47.8 million people quit their jobs voluntarily meaning they did not have another job lined up, but were like, I'm just out. I am out of here. And then that continued in 2022, where in March, 4.5 million people quit. By May, 4.2 million people quit their jobs. And it still is continuing today, even though they're not reporting on it. And then finally, if that wasn't enough, then we identified that all of that PPP money, all that money that was supposed to be going to employees, only 25% of it went to employees. The other 75% went back to shareholders, owners, creditors, suppliers, but did not go to employees. So why do we think employees have created this great resignation? Because they felt exploited, they felt used, they felt undervalued, and they felt underappreciated, not seen at all. So that's how we've got there, okay? That's why we're in the position that we're in right now. So then now let's get into how that actually affects you. So when you actually have a toxic masculine leader, right, or toxic masculinity in your team, how does that actually affect you? What triggers you? So the two questions I'm going to pose for you, and you can even pause this if you need to answer these questions. But the questions that I'm going to ask you are, what triggers you about the toxic person at work? What actually happens, right? Is it when they walk into the room? Is it when they cut you off at a meeting? Is it when they dismiss any of the ideas that you have? What are the actual triggers? Because we have to identify these and set boundaries around these, in order to make sure that we begin to dismantle it, right? And then after you identify what actually triggers you about the toxic person at work, how does their presence affect your work? Do you see yourself being less productive? Do you see yourself less engaged? Are you less likely to actually come to the office because you know that person is going to be there? How does their actual sheer presence affect your work? And if we were in a meeting, we would actually explore this, and I would listen to many of the different ideas, because what we have to recognize is that toxic people actually make you stupid. There was a study that was actually done by the University of Berkeley not too long ago, where they actually had students take a test. And the first group of students, the control group, walked into a room to take the test. And when they walked in, there was a sign there that communicated, hey, test is not in this room. It's in a room down the hall. They went, they took the test, all good. The second group walked into a room, and that room happened to be a professor's office. And the professor was like, what are you doing in my office? What are you, stupid? There's no test in here. Obviously, there's not even enough room for any of you to sit out. Clearly, the test is down the hall. You probably are late. You better hurry, but get out of my office. And then that second group took the test. And when they took the test, they performed 25% worse. Now think about that. One time being berated by a stranger, and they perform 25% worse. Imagine if you're getting berated all the time. Imagine if that person is around you for 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week, 2,000 to 2,500 hours a year. What type of impact is that person going to actually have on you? Now, here's the worst part about the test is it didn't stop there, because after everyone took the test, as they came out of the room, someone would drop their books and they would see whether or not anyone would help them. And they found that the group that got berated, the group that had some toxicity in their life right before they took the test, were 9 times less likely to help. So toxic people also make you mean. They make you meaner. They turn you into someone that you don't want to be. And we have to recognize this is the actual impact that it's having every single day. The other part that we have to recognize is this idea that alpha males make us strong leaders, that we need alpha males as part of this organization. When the person that came up with the idea of alpha male, this man named David Meck, who did this study back in 1970, studying wolves in captivity, found that when he studied them again in the 90s, he realized alpha males actually didn't exist. Out in the wild, wolf packs were run by both a strong female and male wolf. There were no alpha males. That was not a thing. And actually, what alpha males described was the behavior of lonely creatures. That alpha males only work in a confined space. So the next time someone's just like telling you, like, alpha male, you got to be an alpha male, let them know this doesn't actually exist. Okay. Also, we have to challenge other assumptions that toxic masculine leadership produces higher profits. No truth to that. Absolutely no truth to that. The data does not lie. When you have directors that are women or executive leadership that are women, you make more money. Higher productivity, higher retention, more benefits when you have leadership that is diverse, when you have more women in leadership position. Heck, 41 out of the top Fortune 500 companies are run by women, even though they only represent 15% of the Fortune 500 companies. So they are making massive impacts. You make more money when you have more women in leadership positions. Do you want to make more money? Here you go. This is the solution. So we have to challenge that assumption. But in addition to that, toxic masculine leadership is actually costing us billions per year. SHRM did this study back in 2019 that found the cost of turnover is estimated to be around $223 billion over the next 5 years because of a toxic boss, right? Gallup did even a more concerning study that found that simply having a toxic boss costs companies between $450 billion to $550 billion per year. Now, what does that mean to you? Because these are massive numbers. What does that mean to your organization? So let's say you have a toxic masculine leader, right? Or just a toxic staffer within your group. And let's say you have a team of 5, right? Just them around you is going to cost your team $70,000. Right? Because it's actually reduces the productivity of each member by $14,000, according to a Michigan State study. In addition to that, that's just productivity. Now imagine all of the people that have quit because of this toxic masculine leader, right? We're talking about 6 to 9 months of someone's salary. So if you're paying someone $60,000 a year, that's $30,000 to $45,000. If you're paying someone $100,000 a year, that's $50,000 to $75,000. You're losing at the bare minimum for each person that quits because of this toxic person. And we haven't even thought about the lawsuits. The lawsuits, just the discovery alone, can cost between $75,000 to $150,000, according to litigation cost survey of major companies. We're not talking about settlements. So this is costing us real money. And this is part of the reason why I show this to you. So you can take this back to your leadership and be like, is this worth it? Are we okay with this? Because we have to recognize, like, this is not just detrimentally affecting, like, our productivity and our retention. This is directly affecting our bottom line. So we also have to recognize, what is the value of diverse perspective? That when you have a diversity of perspective, you actually make more money. I had a former colleague named Natalie who used to be a biomedical engineer. And she worked for a lot of biomedical companies, and she was always dismissed because she was a woman, right? But then one company finally actually valued her, and they were in a meeting one day and they couldn't figure out, they were trying to figure out a stent for a new aortic valve, and they couldn't figure that out. And they turned to Natalie and were like, we can't figure it out. Do you have any idea? And she just turned to them and she was just like, well, it's easy. Why don't we just use the design that is used for a scrunchie? You know, it elongates, it actually could work perfectly for the stent. And all these guys were like, what's a scrunchie? What's that? And she had to pull one out of her bag. She had to show it to them, pass it around. That became a multi-million-dollar patent. Okay. So diversity of perspective brings more money. We have to recognize that we're not just checking things off the box, but that we actually, oh, we got this person, but it's that actually we're trying to bring different perspective, different experiences, because that actually brings more value. Okay. And I might as well share this other, a study that I spoke about. There was something done by a company that hired Harkness.ai. It was an artificial intelligence company. And what was interesting with them is this CEO hired them because his meetings were not very good. He didn't know what had happened. They used to be good, but he was wondering why they weren't good anymore. And the AI actually studied the meetings over a 5-week period. And they found that this CEO was talking 70% of the time. And not only was he talking 70% of the time, he was looking mostly at the men. He was addressing the men a majority of the time. He was barely even acknowledging the women. And there was one Black woman in the room, and he never acknowledged her, not once. So over the span of 5 weeks, he started to check himself. He reduced the amount of time he spoke by 60%. Satisfaction in meetings went up 50% by all people. 600% increased engagement by the women in the room, and 1,600% increase by the one woman of color in the room. And what did that bring? That turned meetings from only producing 22 ideas to 48 ideas in the meeting. So this is why we're doing this, right? This is recognizing the value of diversity of perspective. So now let's explore, what traits does your team currently have? Because this is an exercise that I do with leadership teams all the time as a way of identifying what's missing. What do we need, right? What have we been valuing for so long? And we've been evaluating profitability, short-term profits, making sure that we are competitive. Have we been, commanding and controlling staff for a really long time? Have we focused more about individuals than about the team? What traits do we currently have, right? And then after you have identified, so go around, you would make this list, then you would actually circle what traits your team has. Then you would ask yourself, what traits are currently missing? How much are we focused on sustainability? How much are we focused on following our intuition, cultivating a certain level of emotional intelligence, collaborating, inspiring our staff rather than commanding, controlling them? How much are we focused on the power of social networks and connection, right? Instead of hierarchy. And the more we can actually recognize that, the more we can actually identify how we can find balance between this. Because then after you identify these two, then you do the big reveal that identifies the fact that these are traits of both healthy masculine and divine feminine leadership. And we need both. That we need to be thinking long-term as well as making sure that we hit our numbers. We need to be thinking about allowing ourselves to follow our intuition while also at times focus on logic and reasoning, that we got to collaborate sometimes, and then also be ready to be competitive outside, not internally, that we care about connection, right? And the more we can actually do this, the more we can build a future leadership group that actually exhibits the qualities that we want in successful leadership. this is how we can actually do it. And right now we've skewed so far to masculine that it's become toxic because we're only valuing a certain type of leadership style right now. So now that we've identified types of leadership, how do we actually address that leadership? And also starting to make a case for why we need to dismantle toxic masculinity and how much it's costing us. When we actually sit down with decision makers, how are we approaching this? And how are we approaching this in a strategic way? So the way in which we have to do that is we have to identify the primary motivations and drivers of the organization. So I had a toxic person in my workplace, a toxic masculine leader that actually reported to me, but he was really good friends with the CEO, right? How many of you have experienced that? So when I approached our CEO, I was, I could have vented, I could have complained, but I realized I had done that before, had not worked. So then I was like, okay, how am I going to do this strategically? So when I sat down with our CEO, I first approached it through these questions, right? So, or these identifiers. So I first asked, okay, to our CEO, what are the main goals of our organization? Oh, is it to make money? Because this person is hemorrhaging money by the amount of people that are quitting their team and not productive because he's being so toxic, right? And then I identified what are the values of our organization? Curiosity, psychological safety, having a really good time. Exhibits none of these things. If anything, he's sucking the life out of this team. So they can't be productive and they don't want to be here. And then I identified what are his primary motivations. Oh, he wants more market share. Oh, he wants a larger bonus, right? He wants to be making more money. Oh, he actually wants more media attention. Well, what are the main drivers of that decision maker? Can't achieve any of those as long as we have this toxic person in our workplace. Are you okay with that? Are you okay with losing money and losing market share because of this person? And then finally, and this is tough to identify, but you have to identify what are the primary motivations of that toxic staffer? Why do they act the way they act? Oh, do they actually think this is effective? Do they actually think this actually works? Maybe they think this works. So having that conversation with them and being like, why are you the way you are? Do you know that this actually is causing more people to quit? So actually recognizing those is going through this is a really strategic way in which you can start to make inroads and start to dismantle that toxic masculinity. So now let's get to solutions. What are tangible things that you can actually do on a regular basis to start to dismantle this toxic masculinity and toxicity in the workplace, right? So I'm going to go from easiest to implement to hardest to implement. Easiest to implement, not very impactful, to hardest to implement, very impactful. All right. So let's start off with reframing and redirecting. So the next time you're having this toxic masculine leader talking to you and they're just going at it, one thing you can first do is reframing. You can look at this person like a child and be like, oh, you're just having a tantrum right now. This is a tantrum. I don't need to deal with this, and just simply walk away. The other way is you can actually redirect. So let's say that toxic masculine leader destroys meetings. It's always poking holes in everyone's ideas at meetings. You'd be like, hey, Chad, and if there's a Chad listening to this, I apologize, but I'm going to use Chad as the example. Hey, Chad, let me save you a meeting. Let me save you a meeting because you don't even like these meetings, right? I'm going to brainstorm a bunch of ideas with everyone, and then I'll come up to you afterwards and I'll share those ideas, and you can poke holes in whichever ones, and we can come up with the best idea. But let me save you time, right? So redirect. Not the most effective, but an option. Then there's actually challenging the a-hole directly, challenging Chad directly. Now, if you do this at a meeting, you could be like, all right, listen, before the meeting, you start to strategize. Hey, Samantha, hey, Daniel, listen, when Chad cuts you off, I'm going to get your back. right? And then Chad cuts off Samantha, and you're like, whoa, 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 I think we need to hear from Samantha. She is the project lead on this. I think she has a lot to say. I think we need to hear from Daniel because Daniel has been working on this project for the last year, right? And the more you start to do that and get each other's back, and if you have a facilitator that also can get your back, you set the ground rules of the meeting and you start to occupy the meeting back over the next 3 to 6 month period, right? So you can do that in the meeting. Outside of the meeting, you could also challenge Chad directly. You could show up either directly as yourself, one-on-one, or show up with Samantha and Daniel and sit down with Chad and be like, listen, what's the goal of the meeting? Is it for us to get the most ideas? Because if that is the case right now, that is not happening. Because every time you cut off Samantha, every time you cut off me, I don't want to share, right? And what you're doing there is you're not attacking their character, right? You're addressing their behavior and the impact that's having. So when you cut people off, people are less likely to share. Thus, we have less ideas. Is that your goal? Is that your intent? Maybe they don't know. And they were like, whoa, sorry, I didn't realize that. Hopefully. A lot of times that doesn't happen. But you never know. But they could also be like, yeah, I'm going to do whatever I want. I get to do whatever I want. And then that is when you go to their boss or their boss's boss and you address like, this is the impact that it's having. This is the impact it's having on productivity, on retention, on potential lawsuits. Are we okay to that? That's when you go to the primary motivations. Now, what happens if your boss is the a-hole? What if you have an a-hole in your group, but then you also have a a-hole boss? This is a good opportunity. And why is it a good opportunity? Because then you finally find out, where does your organization stand? Are they in sport of a-holes, or they are in sport of success and making more money, right? And you get to find that out because you approach that person directly, or approach the person above the person, or you speak to HR, right? Have HR get your back, right? And you talk to them and you're like, listen, how are we going to address this? Because this is directly affecting our bottom line. And if they choose to protect them, then you know where they stand. And then you have a choice as to whether you want to be there or not anymore. And then finally, and this is the hardest to implement, but really impactful, we have to address our inner a-hole, our inner Chad. And why do we have to address our inner Chad? Because if you identify, why are you being triggered by this person? It's because a part of you actually believes that. A part of you actually believes that Chad should be your boss. A part of you actually believes that Chad's smarter than you. And then once you identify, like, wait a minute, that is not the case. I should be Chad's boss. This person has no idea what they're talking about. The next time Chad is rude to you, you can be like, Chad, don't ever speak to me that way. And as soon as you see that, you're like, oh my gosh, Samantha just stood up to Chad. If Samantha stood up to Chad, I can stand up to Chad. So I start setting boundaries for Chad, and everyone starts setting boundaries, and no one tolerates his BS anymore. He can't act like a child anymore. And then Chad has a choice. Does he change his behavior so he can stay at the organization? Or is it finally time for Chad to leave because he can't run amok anymore? This is not his playground to play anymore. And that's what we can do, right? That's how we can have an impact. And then we have to remember, before we do any of this, we have to figure out about practice. We got to practice having these hard conversations. We got to practice this over and over and over again, right? To recognize how it's going to feel to actually really have that conversation. Because the more you embody this, the more you'll be like, oh, I can do this. And part of the reason why I show this football team, right? And I showed this because I was just doing this talk for in Denver for Colorado SHRM, is because I was speaking to one of their former players, and I asked them, you practice all week for a 3-hour game. Where's the practice at work? We never get to practice. We get thrown into something, and then all of a sudden we have to have really hard conversations, and we are not prepared, right? So recognizing the more you can practice with your colleagues, the more you can practice with your friends, the more likely you're going to be able to actually address this and not be so intimidated to have these conversations. So now let's recognize agency and power, because I recognize that there's power dynamics, and we cannot ignore that power dynamics exist. I will say, though, at the same time, you have some agency regardless of whatever level you're at. So let's actually recognize where that is. So whether you're at an entry level position, you still have a certain level of power because you are at the ground floor. So you actually are the heartbeat of the organization. So my first suggestion is that you start sharing your story and start finding those allies, male, female, non-binary. Identify those allies that have experienced the same thing. And then you start gathering data and documentation on those toxic staffers. Start making a-hole journals. As I've talked to people that have actually come up with a bunch of a-hole journals, and then they delivered that to HR as well as their leadership, and they could not ignore it. They had to let the person go. And then also recognize you have a certain level of leverage because they don't want to lose you. They have enough time trying to find staff that they're not trying to fire you right now. So we have to actually challenge that notion that if I speak up, I'm going to get fired. There's a huge distance between being fired and speaking up. There's a middle ground, right? That's usually what's going to happen. It's not going to be worst case scenario, but most likely scenario is you're not going to get fired. So we have to challenge that assumption. Okay. Now let's say you're at the mid-level management position. You're getting crapped on from the top and you're getting complaints from the bottom. So you're just getting it from all sides. We still then have to take the time to identify what happened. What happened in the last 2 years? So let's look first off at the exit interviews. Why did people quit? Was there a certain pattern? Was that pattern a toxic staffer? Was that pattern a toxic masculine leader? Right? You can do this at HR. And then we have to start having conversations with our staff. Did we lose your trust or did we gain your trust in the last 2 years? These are the difficult conversations we need to start having. And then we have to recognize, even if the company is toxic, even if the department is toxic, your team doesn't have to be. What type of influence can you have? And if you're implementing healthy masculine and healthy divine feminine leadership, and you're making inroads, you're having more productivity, you're making more money, you're keeping more staff. People are going to be like, what are you doing? What effective strategies are you taking on? And your good habits might have a ripple effect on all of the other parts of that department. That's where we have to recognize that we have more impact than we realize, right? And then at the executive and C-suite level, we have to be constantly asking this question. Everyone should be asking this question. What behavior are you currently tolerating? And why are you tolerating that behavior? Why are you letting Chad run amok while everyone else has to follow the rules, right? Has to follow the HR systems. We have to reassess what metrics are we measuring success by? Is quarterly profits more important than sustainability and retention right now? We have to re-question, what are we measuring in our performance evaluations? Is this even, relevant anymore, right? And then finally, we have to fund our employee resource groups, our ERGs, because these ERGs, these employee resource groups, sometimes are the only parts of the organization where people feel seen, heard, appreciated, and valued, right? So let's foster ERGs on diversity. Let's foster ERGs on more women leaders, right? And the more we can do that, the more people feel recognized in the workplace, and they're more likely to stay because of that. And then for human resources, let's finally change the perspective on HR. Because right now they believe you are protecting these toxic masculine leaders when we know you're not. Let's change that perception that you're just here to CYA the organization and you're not there to get their back. And the more we can actually show that we have their back, the more we can actually start to dismantle this toxic masculinity. And then we have to challenge the hypocrisy of our organizations. Are we actually embodying our core values? Are we actually focused on making more money? Because by keeping these people, we're losing money. And then we have to understand the perspective of who's coming into our workforce, whether that's Gen Z, Gen Xers, millennials, heck, even some boomers, right? Who's actually coming into the workforce and what are they bringing? Because Gen Z does not care about the BS of the past, right? If your leadership does not hold emotional intelligence, they are done. They are done with this and they'll just leave. And that's inspiring everyone else. They have much higher standards of what leaders need to be in our organization. And we have to recognize that. All right. So now let's get to the strategy and implementation part. And this is something that you can do with your team, right? With your department to break things down. So these are the questions that you need to explore. You need to explore, what are the goals in addressing this toxicity at work? Are we just trying to fire this one person? Because simply firing this one person, if you haven't addressed the actual toxic masculine leadership issue, then it's going to continue to be fostered by somebody else. Someone else is going to fill in that toxic masculine gap. So what are the clear goals in addressing toxicity at work, right? And then what are the initial steps you can do to begin? What's one thing that you can take action on as soon as you're leaving this place? What's the one step? Right? And then the other question then is, who are your allies that can help implement this strategy? Have you identified male allies, non-binary allies, women allies that actually can get your back? That can you look for more people that actually feel the same way you feel? And then we have to really identify what obstacles are going to get in your way. Because we're going to take 3 steps forward, we're going to take 2 steps back. It is not going to be easy. It's going to be messy. And you're not going to achieve everything in one fell swoop. You're not going to have one conversation and then there's going to be a magic bullet that solves everything. I don't even know why we refer to it as bullets, because bullets kill people, right? That's not what we're trying to do here, okay? But we have to recognize what obstacles may get in our way. And how are we actually addressing those obstacles and not losing hope? Because really what we're trying to cultivate is hope and action, okay? And if we were actually doing this in person, the 2 key questions that I would be asking was, what is your first step you're going to do? And who are the allies that are going to help you in this experience? Okay? So this is all of the things you can do to start to dismantle toxic masculine leadership. But what we now have to recognize is that we really are at a crossroads where we have to decide where the future of work is going to go. And you are the decision maker in this. Every decision that you make within the next 2 to 5 years is going to decide what type of future of work we're going to have. Are we going to have a pre-pandemic, toxic workplace future that's still built on the individualism, competition, control, ego, old boys club style that we actually hate? Are we finally willing to embrace a future of work that is built on shared humanity, compassion, empathy, collaboration, a certain level of integrity, right? Where we're following our intuition, we're embracing our healthy masculine and our divine feminine leadership qualities. Because when we do that, then we can create a work culture that is psychologically safe. Then we can create a work culture that cares about people, that cares about allowing their staff to feel seen, heard, appreciated, and valued. And that's when we finally can start to dismantle toxic masculinity in the workplace. So as we recap, we have to learn from the mistakes of our past. We have to recognize what mistakes we made. We have to outline to our leadership how much this is actually costing us. We have to identify what type of leadership traits we want and give examples of healthy masculine and feminine, divine feminine leadership. And then we have to pick a solution that works for our team and identify allies as we pick that solution. And then finally, we need to take action and practice having those hard conversations so that you can embody it and be ready when you actually need to step into the ring. Because together we can truly dismantle toxic masculinity in the workplace and finally create a work culture that does not suck. That is a place that we all want to actually go to, and a place where we feel recognized for our work, and we can actually have the impact on the work that we've always wanted and actually make a difference. My name is Jeff Harry with Rediscover Your Play. If you'd like, you can scan this QR code or simply go to rediscoveryourplay.com/GSC SHRM, where all of the slides are here. A bunch of the studies that I mentioned are also listed there, as well as the worksheet that you can actually walk through with your staff. Thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate you, and good luck in your workplace. And if I can do anything to support you, simply contact me. Thanks so much. Take care.